Hey there everyone, let's talk about Dragon's Dogma 2. The game's been out now for about a week at the time of making this video, and suffice to say, there have been a lot of impressions and reviews about this game, and I too...
There are several things I would like to say.
Let's just start, shall we? Dragon's Dogma 2 has underwhelming content and is further amplified by odd game design. By and large, the best part of this game is the combat, but because we have a lot of ground to cover, I ask you to feast your eyes upon the footage and just nod your head in agreement when it comes to the combat. The main issue is everything else. For newcomers heading into the series for the first time, I do think this is still a good entry into the series, but it's not a good sequel. I'll explain. The game started development in 2019, probably right after Devil May Cry 5 was released, where the director was also Hideaki Itsuno, the director of Dragon's Dogma. Dragon's Dogma is and always has been his passion project, and from the first game, the final product from that passion that we got was flawed but amazing. Flawed but amazing. So for Dragon's Dogma 2, it's also flawed but good. Not amazing, just good. Where am I going with this? The game design, or Itsuno's vision, is ultimately where I'm getting at. Comparing the sequel to the first game, the game feels as if this wasn't even meant to be a sequel at all. The game feels more like a remake, or a demake if you are aware of what we lost from the first game. Mob variety is lesser than the first game, which is fine. If not for the mob density in this game, the game packs a lot of the mobs together like it's a fucking parade, and combine that with the fact that most of the travelling is still done by method of feet, you're gonna run into enemies on your travels. Again, not a bad thing, unless it's happening every fucking minute! I took the freaking Ox cart, which is a new addition to this series by the way, as a new means of fast travel. I arrived safely at the city. Or so I thought, because the game won't even give me time to breathe when I get back to... Okay, I know this is probably not intentional from the game, but fuck me did it imprint the mob density issue in my head. Having to constantly fight without breaks when you just want to travel is annoying, and when it's the same few goblins, saurians, harpies and perverts, the lack in mob variety starts to show, especially if you have played the first game. The map design isn't bad, the game looks great, and some points of interest are memorable. Memorable. It's the travelling that highlights the annoyance of the map design. While it gets better in the second half of the game, the first map has water placed throughout the area, which means travelling from point A to point B has to be around this body of water, because you can't swim in this game, which also means you are bound to run into more mobs because of how dense they're placed, and it makes travelling that much more annoying. And if you do end up in the water, your only option is to accept your fate and submit yourself to one of the best genres in hentai history. We got one less equipment slot and lesser variety of equipment. Vocation balancing in this game is baffling to me, especially if you want to be a mage. We had 6 skill slots in the first game, but for this game, we get 4. 4! And you mean to tell me that this is the entire spell list for sorcerers in this game? Where's the rest of the stuff? We lost this for this? Now, as much as I've ranted so far, this game isn't like it's a worse version of the first game.
Are you sure about that?
It surpasses the first in a lot of aspects like the open world, graphics, combat, quest design, but the issue is, we lost just as much from the first game. The first game came out 12 years ago, and reviving the IP with a brand new engine probably means most assets will need to be made from scratch or ported in some way. But when you see the other baffling game development decisions that they willingly chose and dedicated their efforts into stuff that we honestly could do without, and you start to think, what exactly was prioritized to developing this game? Because it feels like a part of the core game features that was in the first game was sacrificed just so they could make time to add stuff that the director wanted. But that stuff doesn't translate that well into this game. And that's where most of my disappointment comes from. For the record, despite blasting the hell out of this game, it's not that I hate the game or I want it to fail, I still enjoyed the game quite a lot. Prior to the review of the Elden Ring DLC, and whether Hytale actually exists or not, Dragon's Dogma 2 was my most anticipated game for the year. Because if you have played the first game, it was an incredibly layered game that was very underrated. And if you did not play the first game, unless you're the kind of person to throw money without a thought, which, good for you, You probably did some research and learned about the good stuff that made this series. But then you consider that the price entry for this game was how much?
What the fuck?
With a solid foundation that they already had from the first game on how they could have improved the series, only to realize that quite a chunk of that foundation did not even make it, or worse, that it was cut out only to be added as DLC, which I really hope is not the case. And while most of the issues I have with the game are personal due to having played the first game, I'm not saying that the game is bad. Again, it's still a really good game, even more so I believe if you are new to the series. But when you have knowledge that we went from being a mage who could cast 6 spells, casting spells like this or this, to being a mage now with 4 spells who can't even defend himself in close combat, and a lot of other things that just takes away from the game's depths and layers, the game went from underrated to underwhelming. And for a game that I love, that's hard to accept.